It has been a busy year in Canadian politics, and as 2018 comes to a close, we're taking a look back at the top political stories of the year. Joining us this morning is the Globe and Mail's Laura Stone. It was hard to choose and to narrow this
It really
down.
was. It was a busy year in politics, Anne-Marie.
But let's start with one that made history. This is the New Brunswick election. Tumultuous is the word that comes to mind. For the first time in 100 years, they ended up with a minority government, and then the drama just continued from there.
It did, because for a couple weeks there, we didn't know who the Premier of New Brunswick was. Both Blaine Higgs, the Conservative leader, and Brian Gallant, the Liberal leader, the former Premier, were claiming that they had won the election, and they were only separated by one seat. What was really interesting about this election was how the smaller parties made up the balance of power. We had the Green Party winning 3 seats and the People's Alliance winning 3 seats. And then they ended up joining on with the Conservatives, and Blaine Higgs is now the Premier of New Brunswick.
Yeah, a tumultuous time. Things have settled in a little bit, but I'm curious what happens now to Brian Gallant for 2019.
Well, he said he is going to step down as the Liberal leader as soon as there is going to be a race to replace him. So I expect he will be leaving in the new year.
All right, still with premiers, Ontario also elected a new leader. Doug Ford wiped out Kathleen Wynne's Liberals, and he quickly changed the tone once he took office.
That's right. You know, Doug Ford really wanted to portray himself as a man of action. And you can't forget that he only won the leadership of his own party a couple months before the Ontario election. So he came in very quickly and wanted to make some extreme changes. So, you know, the first thing that he did was he blew up Toronto City Council. He cut it, he slashed it from 47 seats to 25, and he threatened to use the notwithstanding clause, which has never been used in Ontario before. He didn't end up having to do that, but it was a very unique situation. And then, of course, there was the ongoing controversy surrounding the appointment of his family friend, Ron Tavener, as the OPP commissioner, and Doug Ford has said that he believes Ron Tavener will take over that position after an investigation by the Integrity Commissioner. And then lastly, Anne-Marie, we can't forget the carbon tax. Doug Ford is on a crusade here with other Conservative politicians across Canada to fight Justin Trudeau on the carbon tax.
Yeah, and in amongst that, too, we also had the sex ed curriculum controversy. So there's been a lot since he's been elected. But as you mentioned, the carbon tax controversy, Doug Ford, just one of the faces who are forming this, well, what Maclean's magazine called the resistance against the Premier, or the Prime Minister, with 4 other Conservative leaders also joining on. I like to call them the pushback posse. I feel like they're going to be giving the Prime Minister a hard time in 2019.
Absolutely. You know, the tables have really turned here for Prime Minister Trudeau on federal-provincial relations. He came in with a lot of allies, and now he is going to be facing a lot of resistance or pushback, as you say, on his agenda, and he needs buy-in from the provinces, or else he's going to impose this carbon tax on them in the new year.
Well, these are fighting words from both sides. We haven't seen an actual direct clash yet, but we also have an election coming up in 2019. We could see that soon.
Absolutely. You know, Trudeau's going to be traveling the country. He's going to be campaigning along with the Conservative leader, Andrew Scheer, and he's going to be stopping in, having meetings with these provinces, and they will be pushing back on his agenda.
All right. The biggest political story of the year, we have decided, of course, is the new NAFTA deal, which is what we're calling it, the new NAFTA deal, signed between Canada and the U.S. and Mexico. To say this wasn't an easy feat is an understatement. I mean, the deadline was supposed to be, weeks before it eventually was signed. Remind us again of some of the bumps in this road to get us to where we are now.
You know what? It was a very tumultuous time. And as you recall, Prime Minister Trudeau and President Trump started off on a very good foot. It seemed like Trump really liked him. And then we had that G7 summit in June, and there was, quite a clash here, a war of words, or a war of tweets, as you could say, between Trudeau and Trump. Trudeau came out and he pushed hard against Trump's decision to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, and here's what he had to say.
I have made it very clear to the President that it is not something we relish doing, but it is something that we absolutely will do, because Canadians, we're polite, we're reasonable, but we also will not be pushed around.
Which is strong language, and stronger language than we'd heard. And then, of course, President Trump is never slow to respond. So he takes to Twitter. You'll remember his response where he said, Justin Trudeau acted so meek and mild during our G7 meetings, only to give a news conference after I left, saying that, quote, U.S. tariffs were kind of insulting, and he will not be pushed around. Very dishonest and weak. Our tariffs are in response to his 270% on dairy, and suddenly everything escalated.
That's right. You know, and I think the federal government's position here had been just not to engage, kind of be the slow, steady hand as Trump went up and down, insulting Trudeau and then loving him again. And eventually they were able to come to a deal. And although it wasn't a big win for Canada, they maintained some of those elements of the trade deal that they said were red lines for them, including the dispute mechanism tribunal. They made some gains on auto, and you know, they had to give up some things on dairy, for instance. But I think at the end of the day, Canada was just happy to get this over with.
Yes, and the no longer USMCA, or the USMCA as we jokingly referred to it, now just the new NAFTA deal. We'll see where that ends up. Good to have you here, Laura. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Anne-Marie.
That was a lot of fun. And we have not forgotten the other big political story, which is, of course, the legalization of cannabis. Tomorrow on Your Morning, we'll be chatting about that in much greater detail.